The move to institutionalize epileptics was in part for their own benefit. Without specialized facilities, epileptics were often sent to mental hospitals, even if they were not mentally ill, or to jails, even if they had not committed crimes. At a meeting of the National Conference of Charities and Correction in 1902, Dr. William P. Spratling, medical superintendent of an epileptic colony in western New York, made the progressive case for building more institutions like his own. Colonies with their vocations ranging from weeding the cabbage patch or the making of brick, and abundant amusements and recreation offered the highest treatment of the disease, he said. The interest in building state institutions for epileptics was also driven by fear. In the 1900s, America was still caught up in what had been called the myth of the generous epileptic. Oh, the myth of the dangerous epileptic. Wow, seriously? There was a long tradition of regarding epileptics as, in the words of one epilepsy expert, mad and bad, liable to explosive and unpredictable attacks of violence and insanity, perhaps murder, or at the least moral depravity. For those who feared epileptics, segregation in a far institution was an ideal solution. There was interest in the Virginia legislature in establishing a special state hospital for epileptics, and in 1905 an unusual opportunity presented itself. A wealthy resident of Amherst County, southwest of Charlottesville, left 200 acres of land in Western State Hospitals so it could provide extra comforts to its patients. Extra comforts is in quotes, by the way, just a euphemism, obviously. Sidney R. Merkland had acted in gratitude for the treatment his son received at Western State, even though the bequest didn't be signed for the hospital's general use. Supporters of an epileptic hospital saw an opening. The legislature passed a bill authorizing Western State Hospital to erect on Merkland's land all suitable buildings and appurtenances were the establishment of a colony for the reception, care, treatment, and employment of 300 epileptic patients. End quote. It also allocated $25,000 for building construction. The legislator noted that the new facility would serve dual purposes, providing specialized care for epileptics and reducing the overcrowding in existing state hospitals for the white insane, which were filled to capacity. It was now settled that Virginia would have an epileptic colony, but not everyone agreed the Merkland land was the right location. The state hospital board objected that it was very inaccessible, a situation made worse by the fact that it would be hard to get a spur track on the site, which meant railroad travel would be difficult. The hospital board insisted that an epileptic colony should have a working farm. Okay, the donated land was of poor quality and cut up with ravines, the board said, making it, quote, of particularly no value as farming land. The state hospital board and the legislature began looking for a better site. Western State Hospital sued, arguing that it was the beneficiary of the Merkland bequest, and if the land was going to be used for an epileptic colony, it should be part of the Western State. Western State lost its suit, however, and the Merkland land was sold. The proceeds were used to buy a parcel of 50 miles away, 2 miles outside of Lynchburg, which would be the home for the state's first hospitals for epileptics. The Virginian State Epileptic Colony, as the new institution would be called, needed a superintendent. On April 8, 1910, the colony's board appointed Dr. Priddy of Southwest State Hospital as a medical doctor, a state hospital administrator, and a former member of a House of Delegates. Dr. Priddy brought a rare combination of skills to his position. His first major responsibility, however, was an undertaking. he knew little about. He had to build a facility for housing and treating hundreds of resident epileptic patients. The state hospital board was proving right about the new location. Nestled high above the James River, the wide and majestic tidal river that British colonies named after King James I. The colony sat on a lush 1,020-acre campus. There was a considerable room for facilities, recreation, and most important, I'll read that over. There was considerable room for facilities, recreation, and most importantly, farming. Dr. Pretty would soon put 350 acres or more than 1/3 of the campus under cultivation. Though far better suited for a colony than the Merkland parcel would have been, the site was not without its drawbacks, starting with its remote location. In the colony's early days, the roads leading out to it could be rallied upon, particularly after it rained. The first time the governor revisited, he got stuck in the mud and remained trapped until help arrived from Lynchburg. In the next legislative session, funds were allocated to pave the roads between the highway and the colony. When he took charge, Dr. Pretty presided over a flurry of construction. 2 buildings there were already on the ground where renovation. One became executive offices and the other residence. On March 1st, 1911, the colony's first new structure, the Drury Gilliam Building, was completed. The first epileptic patients moved into the colony on May 16th, a little more than a year after Dr. Pretty took over. In its first year, the colony admitted about 100 patients, all epileptic men. The first wave included 30 epileptics who had been inmates at Western State Hospital, 30 from Southwestern State, and 40 from Western State Hospital. The very first patient to move in was a 37-year-old man who illustrated well why a specialized institution for epileptics was needed. Before arriving at the colony, he had been confined to a mental hospital for 13 years. Though he had no mental defects, epileptics were better off at the colony than they had been at a mental hospital or a jail. But their situation was still far from ideal. The colony had little to offer epileptics patients in the way of medical treatment or therapy, or help in returning to society. The colony was necessarily custodial in character. A history of the institution noted lack of personnel and facility restriction the operation to that level. Lack of personnel and facilities restricted the operation to that level. If the colony could not offer cures, it did provide modest recreations and diversions. There were weekly dances, Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners, and a summer watermelon feast. Inmates were given leaves to attend moving picture shows in Lynchburg, and every residential building had a photograph for the inmates' use. For the more spiritually inclined, services were held in the colony's chapel every week, Methodist and Baptist on alternating Sundays. In keeping with the colony model, inmates spent much of their time working out in the fields. They raised fruits and vegetables, both to eat fresh and to be stored for the winter. Dr. Pretty would eventually be able to boast that the colony, quote, has brought no canned goods for 2 years. The colony had its own cattle farm, and the hog herd alone yielded 20,000 pounds of pork a year, an amount that was, quote, ample for supplying the institution with salt meat.